They found a starving child in the desert. What she was holding made the sheriff drop his gun. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Sheriff Jake Morrison as his horse Belle picked her way through the Rocky Canyon. It was August 1879, and the heat was so intense it made the air shimmer like water. Jake wiped the sweat from his weathered face and squinted against the glare reflecting off the red stone walls. He'd been tracking the Comanchero raiders for 3 days now, following a cold trail that seemed to lead nowhere. The attack on the Martinez ranch 6 months ago had haunted him. An entire family wiped out, their home burned to ash, and no sign of 7-year-old Lucy Martinez. Everyone assumed she was dead or taken by the raiders. But old Pete Henderson had ridden into town that morning with wild tales of hearing a child crying in Devil's Canyon. Most folks thought Pete had finally lost his mind to the desert heat. But Jake Morrison had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and his instincts told him to investigate. The crying came again, faint but unmistakably human. Jake dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel as he pulled his Winchester from its saddle holster. Belle snorted nervously, her ears twitching toward the sound. Animals always sensed trouble before humans did. "Easy, girl," Jake murmured, patting her neck. "Stay close." He followed the sound around a massive boulder, and what he saw made his heart stop. Huddled in the meager shade of a rock overhang was a little girl. Her once white dress was now the color of desert dust, torn and hanging in tatters. Her dark hair was matted with dirt and sweat, her face gaunt with starvation. But she was alive. "Sweet Jesus," Jake whispered, holstering his rifle and approaching. Slowly, the child looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, but she didn't cry out or try to run. She just stared at him with an intensity that made Jake's skin crawl. "Hey there, little one," Jake said gently, crouching down to her level. "What's your name?" The girl clutched something tightly to her chest. A small bundle wrapped in cloth. Her knuckles were white from gripping it so hard. Jake reached for his canteen. "You must be mighty thirsty. Here, let me give you some water." As the canteen sloshed, the girl's eyes went wide with desperate need. But she didn't move toward him. She just sat there, protecting whatever was in that bundle like it was more precious than water itself. "It's okay," Jake whispered. "I'm Sheriff Morrison from Redemption. I'm here to help." The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "You can't have." "It can't have what, sweetheart?" She shook her head, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her face. "They already took everything else, but they can't have this." Jake's heart clenched. "I don't want to take anything from you. I just want to help. Can you tell me your name?" "Lucy," she whispered. "Lucy Martinez." Jake felt like he'd been kicked by a mule. Lucy Martinez. Carlos Martinez's little girl. The child they'd all thought was dead. "Lucy, honey, I knew your papa. Carlos was a good man." Lucy's face crumpled. "Papa's gone. Mama's gone. Miguel's gone. The bad men took them all." Jake had investigated the Martinez Ranch attack himself. The carnage had been terrible. Blood everywhere. The house burned to the ground. They'd found 4 bodies, but never little Lucy. Jake had assumed the worst. "How did you survive, Lucy? How did you get out here?" Through her tears, Lucy told him about hiding in the root cellar while her family was murdered above her. How she'd waited 2 days in the darkness before emerging to find everything destroyed. How she'd been living off rainwater and cactus fruit for 6 months, hiding in caves and staying 1 step ahead of the men who were hunting her. "They keep coming back," she whispered, "looking for this." She clutched the bundle tighter. "Papa said I had to keep it safe. He said it was the only way to stop them from hurting more people." "What is it, Lucy? What's in the bundle?" For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, slowly, she began to unwrap the cloth. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Inside was a US Marshal's badge, tarnished but unmistakable. Next to it was a small piece of paper, folded and yellowed, and a daguerreotype photograph. "Papa was a marshal," Lucy said simply, "but he pretended to be a rancher so the bad men wouldn't know." Jake's mind reeled. Carlos Martinez had been working undercover as a federal lawman. That explained so much. Why the Comancheros had targeted his ranch specifically, why they'd been so brutal in their attack. With trembling hands, Jake examined the photograph. It showed a group of men in army uniforms standing around wagons loaded with rifles and ammunition. In the center was a man Jake recognized from wanted posters, Black Pete Harrigan, the most dangerous outlaw in the territory. But what made Jake's blood turn to ice was the man standing next to Harrigan, shaking his hand like they were old friends. Colonel William Ashford, commanding officer of Fort Bravery. God Almighty, Jake breathed. The implications hit him like a landslide. Colonel Ashford had been selling military weapons to Comancheros and hostile Indian tribes. That's how they'd been so well armed during their raids. That's how they'd known exactly when and where to strike for maximum damage. And Marshal Carlos Martinez had discovered the truth. "Lucy, did your papa ever mention Black Pete Harrigan?" The little girl's face went white with terror. "He's the one who killed Papa, the man with the scar who laughs like the devil." Jake unfolded the paper. It was a map showing the location of a hidden cave about 10 miles north. At the bottom, in Carlos's handwriting, were the words evidence, cash, witness, statements, army payroll receipts, everything needed to hang them all. "Your papa was building a case," Jake said softly. "He was trying to expose the whole criminal network, Sheriff Morrison." Lucy's small voice was trembling. "Are you one of the good guys?" Jake looked into those brave, trusting eyes. This child had endured 6 months of hell, all to protect her father's final mission. "Yes, Lucy, I'm one of the good guys." That's when he heard the sound that made his blood freeze. Horses approaching fast. Jake grabbed Lucy and pressed against the rock wall, peering around the boulder. 3 riders were making their way down the canyon slope, and even at this distance, Jake could make out the black Stetson with silver band worn by the man in the lead. Black Pete Harrigan had found them. "Lucy," Jake whispered urgently, "I need you to climb up on Belle, real quiet like. We're gonna have to run." The little girl's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded and did as she was told. Jake swung up behind her just as the first rifle shot cracked across the canyon. Belle lunged forward, her hooves striking sparks off the rocky ground as they raced through the narrow canyon. Behind them, Jake could hear shouting and the thunder of pursuing horses. "There's a passage up ahead," Lucy called over the wind. Papa used to hide there." She pointed to a gap between two towering rock formations. Jake guided Belle toward it, praying it was wide enough. Behind them, another rifle shot echoed off the canyon walls, the bullet striking stone inches from Belle's head. They plunged into the rocky corridor, the world suddenly dark and cool. The passage was barely wide enough for horse and rider, but Lucy was right. There was a way through. "Stop right there, Morrison." The voice echoed through the passage like thunder. Black Pete Harrigan himself. "That little girl's got something. That belongs to me, Sheriff. Hand her over, and maybe you'll live to see another sunset." Jake kept Belle moving, but he called back. "The only thing waiting for you is a hangman's rope, Harrigan." A cold laugh echoed off the stone walls. "That badge ain't gonna do you no good, Morrison. You got no idea how deep this goes." They emerged into a hidden valley with a small creek running through it. Jake dismounted and helped Lucy down, his mind racing. They were trapped. Harrigan would find other ways into this valley soon enough. "Lucy, I need to know everything your papa told you about that badge." She unwrapped it again, revealing the photograph and map. "Papa," said Marshall, "Thompson got killed trying to catch the bad men. But before he died, he hid proof of all the bad things they did." Jake studied the map more carefully. The cave system it showed was detailed, with multiple chambers marked. If Marshall Thompson had really cached evidence there, it could bring down the entire corruption network. Your papa was continuing Thompson's work, Jake realized. He was building a case that would stand up in federal court. The sound of horses entering the valley cut him off. Jake grabbed his rifle and positioned himself between Lucy and the approaching riders. Black Pete Harrigan rode into the dappled sunlight like death itself. Tall and lean, with a jagged scar running from temple to jaw and eyes like winter ice. His gold tooth glinted when he smiled, and that smile was colder than a grave. "Sheriff Jake Morrison," Harrigan said, dismounting. "With fluid grace, heard you used to be a Texas Ranger." "That true?" "Still am, when it counts," Jake replied, keeping his rifle aimed at Harrigan's chest. Harrigan's two companions, Knife, Eddie Santana, and Mad Dog McGillicuddy, spread out to flank them. Jake was outnumbered 3-1, and they all knew it. "Now, Morrison, I'm gonna make this simple," Harrigan said conversationally. "Give me the girl and whatever she's carrying, and you can ride out of here, breathing. Try to play hero, and you'll feed the buzzards." Jake felt Lucy press against his back, but when he glanced down, he saw something that surprised him. Yes, she was afraid, but there was also a fierce determination in her young face that reminded him powerfully of her father. "I got a better idea," Jake said. "You turn around and ride out, and maybe I won't put bullets in all three of you." Harrigan laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "1 against 3 ain't good odds, Sheriff." "Depends on the one," Jake replied. But he knew Harrigan was right. Even if Jake was fast enough to take Harrigan himself, the other two would gun him down before he could swing his rifle around, and then Lucy would be defenseless. That's when Lucy stepped out from behind him, still clutching the evidence to her chest. She looked Black Pete Harrigan straight in the eye and said, "My papa wasn't afraid of you." Harrigan's face darkened. "Your papa was a fool, little girl, and now he's a dead fool." "He was brave," Lucy said firmly, "and he was smart. Smart enough to make sure you'd never get away with what you did." Jake watched in amazement as this 7-year-old girl faced down the most dangerous outlaw in the territory without flinching. "Give me that badge, child, before I lose my patience," Harrigan snarled. "No." The simple word hung in the air like a challenge. Jake had seen grown men back down from Harrigan's threats, but Lucy Martinez stood her ground. "Lucy," Jake said softly, "maybe you should." "No, Sheriff Morrison," Lucy said firmly. "Papa made me promise. He said no matter how scared I got, I had to make sure the good guys got this evidence." Harrigan's hand moved toward his gun. "Last chance, little girl." That's when Lucy opened the bundle completely, revealing not just the badge and map, but the damning photograph that showed Colonel Ashford shaking hands with Black Pete Harrigan over stolen Army weapons. "You see this?" Lucy held up the photograph. "Papa said this picture would make sure all the bad men got punished." Jake saw Harrigan's face go pale. This wasn't just about a dead marshal anymore. This was about a corruption network that reached all the way to the highest levels of military command. "Now you understand why I can't let you leave here alive," Harrigan said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "This ain't just about me anymore, Morrison. There's powerful men who want this problem to disappear permanently. All the more reason to make sure this evidence gets to the right people," Jake said. But Harrigan was shaking his head. "There ain't no right people, Sheriff. Colonel Ashford's got friends in Washington. Friends who make problems go away." "Maybe," Jake said. "But that don't mean we stop trying." Harrigan's patience snapped. His hand flashed toward his gun with rattlesnake speed. But Jake Morrison hadn't survived 15 years on the frontier by being slow. His rifle cracked like thunder, the shot echoing off the valley walls. Harrigan spun and dropped to his knees, clutching his shoulder. His gun flew from his hand and skittered across the rocky ground. Mad Dog McGillicuddy was drawing his weapon when Jake worked the lever and swung toward him. The second shot took McGillicuddy center mass, and he toppled backward off his horse. Knife Eddie Santana, seeing his partners down, slowly raised his hands in surrender. "Smart choice," Jake said, keeping his rifle trained on Eddie while moving toward the wounded Harrigan. "You think this changes anything?" Harrigan gasped through gritted teeth. "Kill me, and there's a dozen more ready to take my place." "Maybe," Jake said, "but you won't be giving orders anymore." He turned to Lucy, who was staring at the scene with wide eyes but hadn't dropped the evidence. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded. "Are the bad men stopped now?" Jake looked down at Harrigan, who was glaring up at him with pure hatred. "This one is. But there might be others." "Then we better make sure the good guys know about them," Lucy said with a matter-of-fact tone that broke Jake's heart. After binding Harrigan's wound and securing both prisoners, Jake helped Lucy back onto Bell. They had a long journey ahead of them, all the way to Fort Smith, Arkansas, where Judge Samuel Parker held court. Parker was known as the Hanging Judge, a man who had no tolerance for corruption or outlaws. The 12-day ride to Fort Smith tested every ounce of Jake's frontier skills. They had to avoid main trails, knowing that Harrigan's network would have men watching for them. They rationed water carefully and slept with one eye open, always listening for the sound of pursuing horses. But Lucy never complained. She rode behind Jake on Bell, sharing his bedroll at night and his meager rations during the day. She told him stories about her family, her mother's Spanish lullabies, her brother Miguel's skill with a rope, her father's collection of dime novels. Papa said the heroes in those books always found a way to win. Lucy told him one evening as they sat around their small campfire. Even when things looked impossible, your papa was right. Are you a hero, Sheriff Morrison? Jake looked into the flames, thinking about all the times he'd failed, all the injustices he'd been powerless to stop. I'm just a man trying to do right, Papa said. That's what heroes are, Lucy replied. Regular people who do right when it's hard. When they finally reached Fort Smith, Judge Parker took one look at the evidence and immediately issued federal warrants. The photograph was damning proof of military corruption, and the map led to a cave cache containing enough evidence to bring down the entire criminal network. Harrigan was tried and hanged for the murder of Marshall Thompson and the Martinez family. Colonel Ashford was court-martialed and sentenced to life in federal prison. The stolen Army payroll was recovered, and a dozen corrupt officials and outlaw accomplices were convicted. But for Jake, the real victory was watching Lucy smile for the first time since he'd found her in that canyon. She was placed with a loving couple in Fort Smith who understood her need to honor her father's memory. They made sure she grew up knowing that Carlos Martinez had been a hero who died protecting innocent people. Years later, Lucy Martinez would become the first woman to serve as a U.S. Marshal in Arkansas Territory, spending her career hunting down the kind of men who had destroyed her family. But on that August day in 1879, all that mattered was that a brave little girl had kept a promise to her dying father, and a sheriff had chosen to do the right thing even when it meant risking his own life. As Jake prepared to ride back to redemption, Lucy ran up and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Thank you, Sheriff Morrison," she said. "Papa would have liked you." Jake knelt and looked into her eyes, eyes that were young and bright again, despite everything they'd seen. "Your papa would be mighty proud of you, Lucy Martinez. You're the bravest person I ever met." The frontier was full of stories about heroes and villains, but the real truth was simpler. Sometimes justice came from the highest courts and most powerful officials, but sometimes it came from the desert, carried in the small hands of a child who refused to give up hope. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil wasn't a gun or a badge. Sometimes it was just one person deciding to do the right thing, no matter the cost. And if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary courage when it mattered most, you know what to do.